This lecture is going to be on our sun and the general structure of most stars out in the galaxy. So for the first section, 18-6 in your textbook, is going to talk about the different layers of the sun. The sun's considered, I would say, an average size or mass star with an average temperature. It is within the main sequence stars, and it's in the middle of the main sequence stars. Although there are plenty of stars that are much larger than the sun and plenty of stars that are much smaller than the sun. We can break down the sun into two parts, the inner layers and the outer layers. The outer layers is also called the atmosphere of the sun. So the inner layers, at the very center of the Earth, we have the core. This is where fusion occurs, and this is where the energy is formed, because energy is formed from fusion. Inside the core, the temperature is around 15 million degrees Celsius. The radiative zone is just above the core. Here, energy moves in the form of radiation or electromagnetic waves, hence the term radiative zone. An interesting fact about the radiative zone is that light takes about 170,000 years for it to go through the radiative zone. That's because the photons kind of bounce around. They don't go directly from point A to point B in a straight line. They bounce around randomly, trying to get out of the radiative zone. So the light that you're now seeing was actually left the core about 170,000 years ago, so this was around the time of the cavemen. Above the radiative zone, the convective zone, here energy is moved in convection cells, hence the term convective zone. So hot gases rise, they reach the top of the convective zone, they cool down, and then they sink back down towards the radiative zone. So the core is the very center. Here's your radiative zone. So again, the photons kind of bounce around randomly. If they make it to the convective zone, then you'll see we have these convection cells. So those are the first three inner layers. In the atmosphere, the lowest layer of the atmosphere, so this will be just above the convective zone, we have what's called the photosphere or the light sphere. Photo is a root word meaning light. So this is the layer in which light is given off from the sun. Above that is the chromosphere. Chrome is a root word meaning color. So it's the color sphere. This layer produces a weak red light. And just beyond that is the corona. The corona is the layer that produces the rays of the sun. So if you were to just draw a sun and you draw a circle with lines coming around the outside, those lines coming out the sun is representing the corona. Now the corona, interesting enough, can reach temperatures much greater than the core itself. We're talking a few million degrees Celsius. The corona is the only layer that really can be seen during a total solar eclipse, but you still need protection in order to look at the sun when you're looking at the corona. So we have the photosphere, chromosphere, this red glow, and then the corona are the rays coming out the outside. So the next we have solar activity. So what kind of things are happening with the sun? First up, we have a sunspot. With correct pictures and lenses, we can view the sun, and these are the dark areas on the sun, and they are dark because they're cooler on the sun. If you think of an electric stove, and if you turn on that electric stove onto high, you'll notice that the stove becomes bright red. Well, if you turn down the stove a little bit, you're going to notice it turns to black. Even though it's very hot and you can still get burned from the black stove, it is cooler than the red hot stove, so it turns black. Sunspots tend to move in groups, and they tend to move around the sun as the sun rotates. They can last days or up to months, and they happen on an 11-year cycle. So about every 5.5 years we have a maximum, and then 5.5 years later we have a solar sunspot minimum, and then 5.5 years later we have a sunspot maximum. So the cycle completes itself. So from one maximum to one maximum event, we have that occurs in every 11 years. Now the solar activity is important because that's going to determine the amount of solar wind we get, and that can affect our astronauts, and it can also affect our satellites as well as people here on the surface of the Earth. A prominence. This is a stream of flaming gas that shoots out from the surface of the sun. Typically, they form in the chromosphere, or sometimes the photosphere. They can reach thousands of kilometers above the sun, and they're going to follow the sun's magnetic field in an arc shape. A solar flare is an explosion of a buildup energy, and these will last a few minutes to an hour or so they're much shorter than a solar prominence, and they're typically much smaller. But they will send streams of electrically charged particles out into space, causing solar wind and our auroras, our northern lights and our southern lights on Earth. Okay, so here's our solar flare. You can see the streams kind of coming out of the sun towards outer space. A prominence, you'll get more of an arc shape. Now, solar flares, you will sometimes get an arc a little bit, but they're going to release some of that energy off into space, where prominences, most of the time, they're going to wrap right back down onto the surface of the sun. And then here is a sunspot. So they're the dark areas on the sun. Okay, fusion. This, again, occurs in the core of our sun because we need intense heat and pressure in order for atoms to fuse, because they're not going to fuse on their own. They have to be forced to collide together. It's kind of like putting two of the same size magnets together, or the same polar magnets together. They're going to repel each other. Atoms kind of do the same thing because both protons are positive, so they're going to try to repel each other. So we need intense heat, intense pressure, intense speeds of these protons in order for them to collide. For fusion in our sun's made up of about 71% hydrogen, 27% helium. So it actually takes two hydrogen atoms to form a helium. When the atoms combine, then they're going to release energy, and this can be expressed by Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. So a lot of people know this equation, but most people don't know what that means or what the letters stand for. So here you go. E stands for energy, M stands for mass, and C is a constant, which is the speed of light. So if we take mass and move it at the speed of light and collide it, we're going to get energy. How cool is that?